Hello and welcome to Kaiju Curry House. This is episode 111, and tonight we are joined by Mr. Jason Wilson, who is a content creator, writer, illustrator. He's done it all. But we're going to be talking about Coalface, which is his latest creation, which features a dragon, which we all know and loved. I am joined with regular co-hosts Connor Baxter and Mr. Paul Williams. Hello, gents. How are we all doing tonight?
Evening. Good. I think we're forgetting to tell our listeners one thing. It's Happy New Year, folks.
That's right.
Yes, Happy New Year.
Yep. This is, of course, the New Year special, I guess. We've got the Boxing Day special and the Christmas special, now the New Year special covered, I guess. Anyways. So I guess, as always, we should start with the usual question. What have Kaiju been up to? So I'm going to ask Jason first, assuming he's our guest. So, Jason, what have you been... oh, God, I messed up already. What have Kaiju been up to?
Well, I've been putting the finishing touches to the book that I've been working on for the past few years. It's been not long in development. Coalface, The Devil in the Smoke, which is to be released at the end of January. So my Christmas period was spent formatting pages, getting everything pulling together, 200 plus pages of prose and illustration. And yeah, I'm looking forward to unleashing that on the world very, very soon. Looking forward to chatting to you guys about the book.
That's
brilliant.
Yep, that's good. Well, that's fair enough. I guess it's your turn now to pass on the question. So it is a tongue twister. So it is what have Kaiju been up to? So you can pick either myself, Paul, or Joe.
Okay, Joe, what the Kaiju have you been up to?
Well, I'm actually prepared this time. You see, I've had recent time to get into some stuff. So over the holiday period, I had a couple of boxes come. So I got my Defo Reel Titanosaurus, which I am over the moon with. It has a closed tail, which, Titanosaurus being my favorite kaiju, I'm quite glad to finally have a variant with that. I got the Star Ace Ray Harryhausen Kraken in. I didn't go special edition for that because it was big and ungainly enough, but that's also a fantastic figure. I'm going to have to get some pictures up of both of those for all of our listeners, but they're great. And then recently I sat down and watched, not necessarily back to back, but I kind of went through some scenes for comparison between the Japanese cut of Godzilla 1984 and the American redub. And one of the things that I really noticed there, and my partner Don was sitting there with me, and we had a really great conversation about it, was how a good dubbing and sound editing job can make or break a film like that. So while the American version is much maligned for, cutting, inserting its own political agenda, what it does get right is the sound editing. Because if you watch the Japanese cut, or at least the Japanese dub of that, or not the Japanese cut, the English dub of the Japanese cut, there are long pauses with no dialogue, no music. You don't even hear his iconic footsteps, which if you watch the American dub, that's quite a thing that, you remember. So it was really interesting to see one of my favorite Godzilla films side by side, just the different versions that are quite popular amongst fans all over the world, but got to sit down and do all of that. And then everybody rocked my world by telling me that there was a new Dragon book coming out. So I'm looking forward to hearing about that tonight, but I will pass the buck now. Paul, what have Kaiju been up to?
Oh, me, not a massive amount. Well, I should say no. I've done some things. I don't want to take up too much time. Obviously, we're here to talk about Coalface, but I will say I did do as I said I would set out to do over the Christmas break, and I watched season 2 of Ultraman.
Oh, right, okay.
No. I am reading War of the Worlds at the moment.
Oh, nice.
So there is that, but I haven't finished it yet. Well, I've started to read that, and I watched Ultraman season 2, the Netflix anime, and it's fine, but there's just too many Ultramen in it.
Yeah, it's quite different.
There was like 8 or 9 of them. I was thinking, where's
Oh,
the
that's not a new
aliens?
thing. That's not a new thing. There's
Is
a
it
whole
not?
family. Yeah,
Okay.
Ultraman's dad is like Father Christmas. Didn't you know this?
Yeah.
No.
He
We watched
is.
season 1, and yeah, there's the dad that's the original Ultraman, and then his son is Ultraman.
Oh no, no, no. Like that's a different continuity, but like original Ultraman, like his dad is Father Christmas.
Oh, okay. No,
He
I've never
appears
seen the
full on,
original
like in
Ultraman.
Santa garb in one episode. It's pretty intense.
That
Oh,
sounds pretty
oh,
fantastic stuff.
I think
It
for
is pretty
next Christmas, I'm going to have to send you
It's
the
not one of those
entire
things that you
Please
expect.
introduce me
Ultraman
to.
series.
Yeah, I need to see Ultraman Santa. Because
I feel like we need to call out that Shin Ultraman will be appearing in UK cinemas January 11th, this 2023.
we got a date, have
Really?
we?
So soon? Wow.
Yeah, so mark your calendars. It won't be out for terribly long, but it's getting kind of a similar limited release that Shin Godzilla got. So
One showing then.
yeah, one showing that might turn into more. But I think Godzilla is one of those ones that they could market a bit better. Ultraman's one of those things where you may know the name, but the character, I'm not so sure. But yeah, January 11th is the day that it's been thrown out that it will be coming to cinemas in the UK. So mark your calendars, check out your local listings, and we'll see where it is.
Okay.
Fun
Yeah,
times.
I'll have a look for that.
Sorry to interrupt, Paul, but that was a pretty good segue to that.
Yeah, that's great because me and Connor were talking about it on the last episode, saying it's going to come to the UK. They have said it would, but we didn't know when.
Yeah.
So you need a nerdy Joe for these sorts of things.
We didn't realize it'd be that soon. That's great news.
I believe it's Odeon cinemas that are showing it. So if you're like me who live in Aberdeen, there's no Odeon
It might
cinemas.
not be, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Tough luck.
Odeon's around here either. Oh no, there's one fairly nearby. It's only like
I'll have to Google and see what. Okay, but no, Ultraman season 2. Yeah, I it was fine, but I couldn't say I loved it. I want to see season 3, see how they finish it off.
Oh man,
because I really like season 1. That's the thing. It just looked. I mean, even my son came down and goes, "Oh, you're watching Iron Man," and there's like Hulkbuster Iron Man, because that's what it looks like. It looks like the Iron Man suit, just different variations of him. It's like Iron Man, Hulkbuster, War Machine. It's like no, this is all Ultramen.
Yep.
Who has the most iterations? Doctor Who or Ultraman in terms of the main character? Because I always think Doctor Who is kind of like our version of Ultraman without the fighting, obviously.
I think it depends, because each of the Ultras is a different person or a different character altogether, whilst the Doctor is the same character, bar say the Peter Cushing ones, which yeah, it's debatable because they both started running roughly around the same time, so I'll need to look that up.
That's something for you to find out, Connor.
Yeah.
Minimum 13 Doctor Who's. I don't know how many Ultra people there are, but conceivably there's a whole planet because they are a race. So,
there's planets, alternate realities, and all that. Yeah, it's just let's just say the continuity of a lot of the Ultra shows is very loose, so don't take it seriously. Yeah.
Have we picked on you yet?
No, you have not.
Connor, what have Kaiju been up to?
So, you might be disappointed to hear I haven't done anything Kaiju related, really.
I'm very disappointed.
Yeah. So, I ended up getting another mug. So, I showed off the Aurora Godzilla mug last time, and now we have the Ray Harryhausen Kraken mug, because, nice. Connor's favorite Ray Harryhausen film is Clash of the Titans. This is an official mug, by the way. It's by the Ray and Diane Harryhausen Foundation. Don't ask me where I got it. I forgot the website where I bought it from. Yeah, so I'm not only just the number one Meg fan, I'm now the number one mug fan. So there you go. But other than that, come Christmas time, I got 2 somewhat Kaiju-related box sets, depending on your view of things. Because these are strange creatures. These are the Universal Monsters in 4K. And we were discussing these briefly before we started recording the episode. And I'll just say, if anyone has the previous Blu-ray sets, the Universal Monsters, you're not going to be missing much. But, any day is a good day to watch a Universal monster movie. I'll just say that.
Can I ask a question? Does that set include Bride of Frankenstein?
No. So Universal, I think this is just to fleece more money out of you. They actually did 2 sets, actually. Right. So the first set just has Dracula, Frankenstein, The Invisible Man, and the Wolfman. And the second set has The Mummy, Bride of Frankenstein, Phantom of the Opera, and Creature from the Black Lagoon. It's the Claude Rains Phantom of the Opera, though. So the Lon Chaney one, I guess, gets a miss. But never mind. That being said, Creature from the Black Lagoon is probably the best looking out of all the films, I think, on that set. They really
Would
did
be
that.
because it had the most effort put into its filmography, to be fair, or its recording.
Possibly, and possibly the restoration itself is also top notch, I think. Yeah. But
the 2D version, I take it.
I think it does
Both.
include the 3D version. I'm not sure. Let's see. Does not. Okay, that's fine.
Oh, I think the Blu-ray version did, but I could be
Blu-ray
wrong.
does have a 3D version, because I am quite keen to show anybody and tell anybody who will listen that the 3D version of Creature from the Black Lagoon is brilliant.
Oh man. Yeah, didn't they include like the 3D glasses as well with the Blu-ray sets? The Blu-ray.
Oh no, it's not the old.
Mine didn't come with it.
It's not the old black and green. Sorry, the red and green.
Blue, red.
So
It's proper stereoscopic.
Yeah, well, it's the proper stereoscopic vision, but it's essentially you can use the same. The glasses that won out in the 3D race are the same ones that you use at your typical cinema nowadays if you're seeing a 3D motion picture. Right. So if you have those glasses for your home television or whatever 3D glasses that you have, depending upon your make, they'll work with the Creature from the Black Lagoon. The way that it was shot, it can work with just about anything. They had 2 cameras at a slightly different orientation, and they were synced up so that every other frame is a different camera. So you can pull and take those different viewpoints. You can use one frame and then digitally make it 3D. There are all sorts of things that you can do with Creature from the Black Lagoon, but because it was shot that way, the gateway is open for you to do or to format it however you want in terms of 3D. So
that's pretty amazing. for the time.
Joe went over this in an episode.
Yes, we did ages ago, didn't we?
Yeah, and I am still in awe of the fact that they used old school, like proper film underwater in a cold spring in Florida with actors wearing heavy rubber suits to make that film. That's a very impressive feat in and of itself, and that's a great story that I don't think it's told enough.
It still looks amazing. Still look those underwater sequences are. I watched it fairly recently, and they still really hold up.
My favorite bit in that film, I thought it was just great that someone thought of this, is it's his gills flapping when he's out of water. Just seeing the gills flexing like an actual fish, would. That was just a great thing that was added there. But anyways, we digress. We are here to talk about Coalface. Jason, can you take us through what your book is about without too many spoilers? Because I totally intend on reading this.
Okay. Coalface is a sort of a socio-political fantasy fairy tale set within the 1980s Thatcher years of Great Britain, specifically during the year of the year-long coal miners' strike, in which Britain was almost plunged into a kind of like a civil war of the poorer working class miners and all the people who fell into their side against the government. And growing up, I grew up within this situation because my father was a coal miner who was one of the striking miners. But I'm going to rewind before that, going back in time. I used to live in a very, very small village.
Your age there, doing the VHS tape sound.
Yes, yeah, we're going to be going back before the VHS era, even to the mid 1970s. And I grew up in a very, very tiny little young boy in this very, very small village near Hull, Scunthorpe. And we lived next to, or very near to, a very, very, very large, almost like something from a Godzilla movie, a very big chemical factory, a big, almost like a power plant with 3 reactors, and they produced nylon there. And it was this great big industrial plant. And then one day, one weekend, it exploded when one of the reactors went critical, and the entire plant was boom, just wiped out, killing everybody in there. Now, thankfully, it was on a weekend when most of the workforce was away. But
that disaster surely has a name, it's
the Flixborough disaster. If any of your viewers want to look it up, there's YouTube videos about it. There's news reports.
Flixborough, is that how you say it?
Flixborough.
Flixborough. All right, there we go.
And it was Britain's biggest explosion post World War II, and one of its biggest industrial disasters in living memory post World War II. And it wiped out the surrounding area, including the nearby village. And as a very young boy, I just remember seeing the aftermath of seeing the mangled wreckage of this enormous power plant and the nearby village destroyed. And my brain, because I was super young at the time, it just couldn't compute what is all this twisted wreckage? What does it represent? What is this? The weird skeletal things? Like, it was like something from a Godzilla movie, which obviously years later I came to recognize as something like a very small version of something like, Godzilla's assault on Tokyo. And the surrounding houses with all the windows blown out, and there's furniture in the street, like sofas and things, sort of things as a young child you just wouldn't normally see. It was like a war zone. I thought, did a monster come and destroy this? Did a giant thing that I would see on TV come and stomp through the landscape? And I didn't know what Godzilla was and things like that at the time. I just had this kind of strange, childish sort of memory or idea of images that I've seen in books and things. So I think that was the moment that sparked my fascination with monsters and disasters. And then when I saw a Godzilla film, and I was conscious enough to actually understand and watch a Godzilla film, I thought, the imagery looks just like where I grew up. And my family moved away from the area because they just didn't want to be near this devastated industrial work.
Being next to a crater isn't as fun.
Yeah, exactly. And we lived down the river, and some of the chemicals spilled out from this disaster and possibly went into the rivers and flowed downstream. So we just didn't want to be living in the area. So my parents moved away.
Really selling this area. It sounds beautiful.
It is. It's beautiful. Yeah. And unfortunately, we moved from one tiny little village to an industrial mining town in South Yorkshire. So I kind of grew up around a lot of industrial areas, a lot of kind of working class men and women, and then years later, the miners' strike came along. We were very, very poor during that, and there was lots of there was violence, there was threats, there was like people against each other, like division in villages, who was for the strike, who wasn't for the strike. But as a very, very, very young teenager at the time, I was just dreaming of getting the hell out of there and escaping, and I was still fascinated by monsters.
Are you talking about escaping Thatcher era UK, or are you talking just that general area?
Escaping anything to do with industrialization, because as I mentioned, the earliest memory I had was of the destruction, and then I saw this mining village begin to almost like implode through to unemployment, and the industry was failing, everything was being closed down. And that's when I think I first got the idea of a creature living beneath the village in the coal mine, and this kind of influence which had seeped out from the coal mine, and it kind of like almost like infected the people. And the people were fighting for coal. They were fighting for their jobs, and coal was a byproduct of that job. And as we all know, now coal is responsible for environmental disaster and the heating up of the climate and so forth, all the fossil fuel debates we're having right now. So that kind of like the story developed as years went by. And then I had the idea of a creature that lived within the coal mine that feeds on coal. And basically it wants to emerge from the underworld and spread its influence across this village and then escape from the village into the wider world. And I wanted to tell a story about industrialization, what people will fight for in terms of keeping the lights on. So you have this tension between the sort of industry that keeps us heated during the winter, the industry that keeps our lights on, the industry that gives us jobs, but at the same time you have the tension that same industry is also slowly destroying us and slowly wearing us down. And we're seeing the frictions that are coming through in the past year with the war that's going on in Europe with Russia, the fact that we have fuel poverty at the moment, the fact that we're trying to move to greener energy, but we're still reliant on fossil fuels. So we have this kind of like, it's almost like a Faustian pact we've made with almost like a devil to keep ourselves, to keep our economies going, to keep the lights on, to keep all our computers running, to allow us to work, whilst we know we need to pivot towards greener energies. So I wanted to write a story about a monster that represented all of those tensions within this kind of microcosm of this small mining village in the north of England during the 1980s, which we're seeing echoing today in terms of what's going on in this country. It's going on across the world in places like Germany. I was fascinated by being in Germany last year, in that the people voted for a green government in Germany because Germany is a very progressive country when it comes to renewable energies. But Germany has no power supply of its own. It has no nuclear power plants. It has no coal-fired energy. It relied on importing everything. So the populace had voted for a green government, thinking, okay, we need to think about the future. And then the war came in Europe, and then they had to open up all the old coal mines. They had to ship coal in to the old coal-fired power stations to get things back on stream, to get them through the winter. So I thought, my God, this is exactly like the sort of situation I'm writing about in this story. So the old demon essentially has returned. It's fumes and smoke spreading across the land, and the people are kind of stuck between these two sides. And the tensions are coming through. So the monster in Coalface, the dragon, as people call it, represents that kind of Faustian tension between communities, jobs, and the environment. So that was a lot to take in, but that's the general gist and the thrust of the actual theme of the story. And then there's the actual story above that, which is an adventure story about two teenage boys, Tony and Billy, and they're on both sides. They're on both sides of the strike. They both have a different view of what their fathers are doing and what their fathers are fighting for. Tony wants to escape. He just wants to escape into imagination. He wants to escape into fantasy. And his friend Billy is more. He is on the side of the militant miners who are fighting for their local pit. Unbeknownst to them, this creature is rising to the surface. The strike is going on, and as the strike enters the winter, and people are getting cold, desperate, hungry, beginning to turn on one another, that's when this creature will emerge.
So, what format does this story come out? Is it? I've seen art, and it almost looks like comic book, but is it like? How much wordage are we looking at? What's the size that we're talking about? The volume here.
It's a 200-page, heavily illustrated storybook, in that there are chunks of prose with illustration. So it's a page of prose, big illustration, prose, illustrations dotted in within the prose, and then illustration. So
that's awesome. I love books like that. That's great. And what reading level will it be?
It's young adults, teenage onwards.
Oh, awesome. I've got a few of those knocking around, so.
Yes, and then beyond all the politics of the story, I mean, that's all beneath the surface. That's kind of like, that's the theme and the message I'm talking about. And I want the reader to discuss these themes, because it doesn't say what's right or wrong, because it's very hard for us to live our lives to be right and wrong in some ways, because we just have to keep going. We have to feed ourselves, and we make choices that sometimes are not good choices, or the unavoidable choices that lead to bad things. So that's what I want the reader to discuss. So if teenagers read it, or adults read it, or older people read it, they can discuss the themes of the story and think that, okay, things are not black and white. There's nuance here, but they do lead to tensions, and they do lead to division. And how do we guide ourselves through that via a monster story? Because I'm very interested in political themed metaphors via monsters. I think Shin Godzilla was kind of ran very close to being, well, definitely was a political monster movie, and I thought that was one of the most clever examples of a political monster story. I was already writing Coalface before Shin Godzilla, because this book has been in development for quite a while. Mm-hmm. But when I saw Shin Godzilla, I was like, oh yeah, that's taking something which we all know as an icon, and it's turning it into something else, and it's discussing deeper themes. And you can have a different take. I've heard people in Japan, I spent a lot of time in Japan, who really hate Shin Godzilla, and then there are people who really like Shin Godzilla. There are some people who think Shin Godzilla is a story about green energy and people pulling together, and I know there's people who think Shin Godzilla is a nationalistic right-wing message. So it's quite interesting how you have these different readings
went
of the
a completely
same
different
film.
direction. I thought it was a comedy about how corporate structure
Well,
works.
yes, it's satire as well. Yes, the Doctor Strangelove style.
You could also say that almost every single Godzilla film ever made has a message of some sort or a political
Yes.
allegory. For instance, of course, the original, of course, is anti-nuclear weapons and all that.
We know the small
Hedorah,
monster. Pretty clear what that's about. Yeah, some are quite strong, blatant messages, aren't they? Where others are
Exactly.
a bit
Hedorah,
less.
which I love as well.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay. And so the book's coming out at the end of January.
Yes, fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. Okay, and where would we be able to buy that?
It'll be available on Amazon. I'm self-publishing it. The book has been in development for about 6 years, and it kind of metamorphosized as it went along. When we first pitched Coalface, I had an agent at the time. It was met with a resounding no. It confused a lot of mainstream publishers, partly because when you pitch a book about a dragon with teenage characters, publishers automatically assume it's dragon means a children's book. They don't understand allegory. They don't understand.
It sounds like a fascinating concept. Somebody is going to get wrapped on the knuckles for passing this up for sure.
Yes, when
is
I
there
did
going to be a
teaser
hardcover?
trailer,
Or are you doing
a little teaser trailer, 1 minute long teaser, and I put it onto Twitter about 7 weeks ago, and within 4 days it got for a book tape trailer, big numbers, but not for a Hollywood trailer, but it got like over 6,000 views in the space of a few days. So I was very happy with the response it got, because I think it just keys into a lot of discussion points that people are talking about at the moment. I mean, it's all we heard about going into the winter was the fuel crisis and the fuel poverty, and everyone's going on strike at the moment.
We timed the release perfectly. Are you going to release like a hardcover version of this?
There's going to be two versions. There's going to be a deluxe hardcover version, which will be a little bit more expensive. And then there's going to be a paperback version, because I also want to make a version that's affordable. And as you know, making books is pretty expensive, especially these days. Obviously, with the price of oil and paper.
Oh, yeah.
More and more.
Yeah.
Be on the Kindle, actually? That's Amazon's. I think when you self-publish, it automatically comes out on Kindle as well, doesn't it?
Yes, that's right.
No, it's automatic, is it?
It's not automatic. You have to.
Automatic. I think you just tick a box or something like that, don't you?
Okay, so you don't have to do too much extra work to get it released on that platform. That's good.
No, and I really wanted to go through a well-known big publisher, because I actually quite like working with publishers, and all my life I've worked through mainstream publishers, but for this story, it just fell in a very strange bracket. It was a story about unemployed, mostly men. It was about a boy navigating through a world where the world around him is changing. It's at a pivot point in history where technology is changing. So you have the old industries of the blue-collar industry, and 1984, everything was pivoting towards the beginning of the digital era, and the fallout of things like the coal mining strike in northern towns is the men couldn't go to work, so the women were the ones who were going to work, getting jobs, becoming the breadwinners and becoming independent, and were then looking after the men. So in a weird way, you had the situation where men were not able to work, but the women were flourishing and becoming politicized and becoming independent. And so it was this interesting pivot point. So I wanted to have this character who was hearing all these different voices. He was hearing the angry voices of all these men and other boys. And then he was hearing all the voices of all the female characters and the strong women who were going to work and supporting, their children, who were organizing charity and food kitchens and pulling themselves and organizing themselves. So you had this interesting, it was like a junction. Different things were happening at different times. And this Tony character could go either way. He could fall, he could succeed, he could listen to negative voices, or he could listen to positive voices. He could change himself. So I wanted to have that going on within this monster story as part of the backdrop too.
Talk about different, groups of people flourishing in this time period, and different characters, that we're going to be encountering in the book. will we be encountering like characters other than the two boys which you mentioned before? Will there be any
Yes.
female characters?
Yeah,
Okay.
there's most. I wanted to write a story where most of the adult men had been taken away, and that's part of the mystery is what's happened to the men because this village, Stainsbury, because the winter has happened after this 1 year coal strike. So coal is a scarce commodity for the people who actually dug the coal. So they're freezing at home. They're cold. They're bitter. They're angry, and they're trying to find different ways to keep the houses warm because I don't know if you know this, but a lot of the houses during the 80s in coal mining villages were actually powered by coal. So you put the coal into your fireplace and that heats your hot water. Without the coal, you can't have hot water. So what happened during the miners' strike is a lot of men would go to what we call the slag heaps, which are the spoil tips, with these great big blackened hills that kind of loom over the villages. And there's a famous story in the 90s.
Still picking for coal, basically.
Yes. And they're still fragile now. They're still, they're still worried that they could still collapse onto villages. So they would go to these slag heaps and they would dig the coal waste and bring the coal waste home. It was filthy, horrible, waste coal that they would try to burn. Now, in the mystery of my story, there's something beneath the coal tips. There's something, as I'm sure you can guess. And so by burning this coal, they're slowly releasing this thing into the air for it to rise up from which is buried underneath the coal tips. And the two male boy characters, the teenage boys, they start realizing the men are disappearing in the village, and including their own fathers. So they're trying to find out what's happened to the fathers. They don't go to the police because the police are very hostile against the miners, and they think they might end up in a youth correction facility or something like that. So they're taking on themselves to find out what's going on. So most of the adult male voices are taken away from the story, and the boys are just kind of acting on what they've heard their dads telling them. So it's like, it could be things like conspiracy theories, it could be stuff about the police, it could be fearful stuff, it could be militant voices. And the only other adult voices you hear in the story are mostly the female voices in the village. And they're kind of like galvanized. They're the ones who are going out. They're the ones who are kind of bigging themselves up. So it's about teenage boys. How do they throw off the influence of their fathers and aspire to get out of the kind of the working class background? Because most of those boys, including myself, would have been working down a coal mine. Because my father basically said to me, "You're going to work down the pit like I do and your granddad did." It was like a legacy thing. It's what working class kids did. They didn't aspire to go to university because it just wasn't talked about going to university. You just went to work in a factory or a mine, or you just did what your parents did. So these boys, again, at this junction where they can think, oh, we could use this to kind of get out of this situation. So Tony's feeling the pull back to the past, but he wants to go to the future. He wants to aspire to something else. So he's caught within this kind of like this turning point. So it's one of the elements of the story. And when this dragon emerges, the village is galvanized behind this demon, this creature, because it promises them, "Oh, I can make your village strong again. If you keep digging the coal, you'll be warm forever. I can feed you. I can make you. I can build you. I can, we can make something of this. We can win." So you can
It's
imagine,
a sentient creature that speaks.
People hear the voices. So
it's like one of those things, like it like leaches into their minds.
Yeah, exactly. They interpret it how they want to interpret it, and they interpret it as it's something that can help them win the fight. But ultimately, this thing will destroy them, and it will feed on them, and it's not a good thing. But the villagers believe it is, because for the men who were striking during the miners' strike, coal was a good thing for them. It was good for their communities. It fed their communities for 100 years. It kept everyone in employment. But it's not sustainable because, as we know, coal, oil, all those kind of things, they're going to be phased out. So it was inevitable that it was doomed anyway. But the problem with all these kind of like these Rust Belt towns and these old industries, and you see it across the world in America and the UK, all the powerful voices start exploiting the situation, and they tell these people, "I can make your life better if you vote for me." And that, again, is what the monster represents in this thing. It's this kind of like this ideology of exploiting a terrible situation and potentially making it worse. But this thing doesn't care about the people. It just wants to feed. It just wants to grow stronger. It just wants to spread its influence.
Okay.
It's brilliant.
The dragon himself, it looks very demonic. Where did you get the influence from?
Well, putting all the heavy stuff aside, I'm a huge fan of Ray Harryhausen, and some of my earliest memories of watching movies are Ray Harryhausen films. And so I wanted to capture an element of Ray Harryhausen in the art style. And the Tony character, the teenage boy in the story, he's obsessed with monsters and monster movies.
I was thinking that the dragon looked very Harryhausen-esque.
Yes. And so I wanted the creature to have an element of a Ray Harryhausen creation. I didn't want it to look like something super modern. I wanted it to have a little bit of a retro, because the story set in 1984. I wanted the monster to feel like it was something from that time or before. So I would imagine, like, if this was, if Coldface, not that I'm writing this to be a film or a TV show, but if it was, I would like the creature itself to almost like a stop motion looking Ray Harryhausen creature in a kind of a northern mining town, kind of moving around the streets, kind of moving in that kind of Harryhausen style. That's so therefore the creature is inspired by Harryhausen, and it's also inspired by, there's an element of the story which is a little bit like the Divine Comedy, the Gustave Doré illustrated version.
Okay.
I wanted the lighting of the story to be very Gustave Doré-esque in terms of in the Divine Comedy, it's about a character who's basically lost his way in life, and he's descending the 7 circles of hell before he can ascend into heavenly pastures. So I wanted the story to have an element of descending into hell as the influence of the demon, the dragon, as the characters call it. It's actually a demon, but everyone calls it the dragon.
Okay.
As its influence spreads and becomes stronger and stronger in this mining village, the more the mining village, as the story goes on, it starts transforming to an industrial hellscape, and it becomes more and more and more exaggerated and more hellish and more demonic, until this creature's sleeping on huge mountains of coal, and the entire colliery looks like something out of like Dante's Inferno. And the characters, there's a female character in the story, but I don't want to say much about her because I don't want to spoil it. Because all my promotional materials is mostly focused on the 2 teenage boys, but there is a female character that has a very pivotal part in the story. But I want to save her for later.
I know, but there are lots of female, folks that are listening to this podcast. They're very interested in having their voices heard, or like having some representation. So it's awesome to know that that's in there.
Yes, yeah, and she's also a tension point in the story as well. There are the 2 boys, and then there's the female character.
There's a triangle, is there?
Yes, and I'll say a little bit about it. She's there to slay the dragon. Billy, who's the one who's more on the side of the kind of like his father and kind of the militant aspects of the story, he wants the coal to flow, and he believes the dragon will help them. But he knows if the girl, this female character, kills the dragon, it might also mean their town. What happens to their village? What happens to them if they don't have coal anymore? And Tony's kind of like he just wants to get the hell out. He doesn't even care about the village or the dragon. So there's this kind of like there's a triangle between these 3 characters.
It's brilliant. Everything you're saying about this book is just fantastic. I can't wait to read it. Like there's a lot of really wonderful things here, and the fact that it is definitively British in a lot of ways. Like I really appreciate that when we're talking about like Thatcher era Britain, that may not like catch an American audience as much, but here that's still very much in the hearts and minds of a lot of people, and it's a very important part of this country's history, and like one of the driving forces for like the modern economy. Like a lot of it's based in like that switch, and I think that it's long overdue to actually have like a creature feature that is not only in a relatively modern world, but it doesn't come from outer space. It's not necessarily a kaiju, but this is something that's always been there. It's always been British, and it's been, brought into the world kind of out of like, again, like you said, like an industrial action. But, like when you talk about the Industrial Revolution and how important that is to this country's history, like there's just a lot of things there that really reflect like this island. Like we've got something in this book, and our fandom has something in this book that is so definitively ours. It's fantastic. I'm really interested in reading it.
The history of the actual within the history, the lore of the story, it stems back to the Industrial Revolution. That's where the story begins. That's where the echoes go back to, or the echoes come from the Industrial Revolution, echoing into the modern day.
It's kind of like it, where the entity has always been around. It just takes shape. Oh, that's awesome.
Yes. And people see what they want to see into it. People think they can exploit it. People think they can work with it. People think they can feed it. So it's just basically, it's symbolic of industry and technology. Technology can help us. Fossil fuels allowed us to thrive. Fossil fuels allowed us to invent things. Fossil fuels allowed us to travel. Fossil fuel built empires. But we also now know it will also destroy us. And it's like all technology, social media. It's an amazing thing. The characters in the story, because they also are very into computers. 1984 was a big year for home computers, and Tony all he desires is to make video games. He wants to make video games. That's all he thinks about, talks about. And again, the teenage characters, they think computers in the future will solve that this new technology where they don't have to work down a coal mine or in a factory. They can program and make computer games. It's an escape from their working class shackles, and so they dream of this almost like a better tomorrow via technology. But as we've seen now, the dream of technology, the dream of the internet, the dream of things like, I'm sure social media starts off as a good thing, but we've seen how that festers and becomes poisoned and turns people against each other. And we just seem to be just stuck in this constant cycle of technology, which is great, and technology which just divides people or enslaves them or makes them addicts or makes them, work harder or they lose their jobs because of technology. Just like in the Industrial Revolution, the Luddites smashed up machines because they were taking jobs away from them and they couldn't get fairer wages. Just as we're going to see in the near future, AI and robotics are going to increasingly impact on probably working class workforces, because they're always the workforce that are most impacted by technology. Just like in the Industrial Revolution, it was the working class people who were impacted the most by technology. And today or in the near future, it'll be the working class people again who are impacted on technology because they won't have those jobs because they'll be replaced by this, that, and the other. But it doesn't mean it's inherently evil or bad. It's just the powers that be that will exploit that technology. And again, that's an aspect of the creature in Coalface, what it kind of represents in terms of as a metaphor.
Yeah. Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating. And as Joe said, the fact that it's in Britain is just great because we don't get that very often. And the fact that it's not, whenever I think dragon, I think fantasy. I always think it's Lord of the Rings. It's not set in a place that I would recognise, especially not Britain. So I
think that was one of the problems with pitching it to publishers. I think when I pitched this in my pitch document, there's a one-line synopsis, and I don't go necessarily into all the stuff I've talked about here. I'm just enthusing to you guys because you're fellow monster fans. But for a publisher, they go, "Oh, dragon, set in a fictional version of a South Yorkshire mining town. Are people going to be interested in that?" I remember my agent saying to me after a while, I said, "Jason, nobody's interested in this setting. Nobody cares anymore." And then that was like 5 years ago, and now we have basically descended back into that time. We've gone back into that time of division. We've gone back into that whole thing. We're talking about energy and fuel poverty. People can't afford to heat their homes. Coal is back on the agenda again. So, I mean, it's really sad because I didn't want this to happen, and it's not something I'm jumping on a bandwagon to exploit as a creative effort. We just have somehow the book has somehow become relevant again, and that's kind of really sad to see. It's like we haven't learned from the mistakes of the past, because there have been oil crises in the past. There have been wars in the past. We did have things like the Cuban Missile Crisis. We have had mass unemployment. We have had general strikes where the working force don't feel appreciated, so they go on strike. And we just don't learn from the mistakes, and therefore books like this sadly become relevant again, unfortunately. But I think at the time, 4 years ago, people were like, "This is a dragon. Why is it not a fantasy dragon? Why has it not got a happy ending? It's not very Hollywood," and so on and so on and so on. But I remember when I was a young boy, because I grew up in a very working class area, I remember when I first saw the movie Alien. And when I first saw the movie Alien, it was in a working man's club in Doncaster. And in working men's club back in the day, they would hire out a 60mm projector and they would show films on a screen. And you'd have all the men and women all, drinking beer, not smoking, cigarette smoke everywhere, and kids, breathing in the smoke and all that kind of stuff. And it's not Alien for the first time in this very industrial working class setting. And I remember the characters of Parker and Brett, they were almost like a voice for the kind of people that I grew up with.
Well, they're all space truckers. That's
exactly.
The only one
by truckers.
The only one who isn't part of the working class in that picture is the one that isn't human. And I'm not talking about the alien. I'm not going to spoil it for folks who haven't seen Alien. Paul with the face hugger on his couch right there for everybody who's like listening along, chuckling away. But like, Ash is the one character in that film where you can tell he's corporate. He's not on the same wavelength with the rest of them, because the rest of them have very pertinent discussions about what works, what doesn't. Am I getting paid for this?
Yeah.
What's going on with our bonus? Are we getting paid? I don't want to do anything extra if we aren't getting paid. And those are very relevant conversations, because a lot of people get exploited by the larger companies that they work for.
Exactly. And I watched that movie and I was too young to necessarily understand all those thematics. But as I grew older, I thought Alien was like a really fantastic blue-collar sci-fi horror movie. It was almost like a kind of an industrial fairy tale horror in space, these truckers pulling this oil rig. And I think the oil refinery is full of coal and oil. I'm sure it says something about coal and oil. And even when they land on the planet, I remember when Ash is doing a diagnostic of what's beneath the surface of the planet, they talk about, there's coal beneath the blah, blah, blah. So they mention things like coal when they're analyzing the little planetoid they land on. And an Alien is about the industry turning against them. And the machinery they have.
Biomechanical. I mean, it's great symbolism all the way through. But this is Paul's bag. Paul, you need to say something about Alien.
Yeah, the Alien. I mean, it's one of the few Alien movies which always disappointed me about every other Alien movie since. Is in Alien, the creature. Forget aliens, forget Queen Aliens, all that kind of stuff. Just Alien in isolation. The creature is a biomechanical thing that is almost formed from the machinery of the ship or the previous ship. It is part of the industry. The people, literally, almost. It's. And in isolation, I just think we don't get many stories that have that kind of level of sort of blue collarness about it. I think Alien 3 came close to it with all the men who are basically in the steel refinery and
podcast.
stuff.
we don't mind 3 that much. I'm a big fan of 3. It was the director's cut is better, and it tried. It tried.
How the Star Wars prequels are looked upon a better light now that we have like the sequel trilogy.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, no, I mean Alien 3 does get a lot of hate, but it's not a bad film.
It's got very strong thematics. I really like. I mean, I think Alien is a fantastic Ripley movie. It's just a shame the alien content is not that great in that film. But in terms of a thematic of an all-male. Again, they're almost like working class characters, aren't they? In a steel refinery, it's a lead mill, isn't it? But for all intents and purposes, steel refinery. And I mean, can you imagine a Hollywood movie where most of the 90% of the male characters are murderers and rapists? And who pitched the idea of like, now we'll just drop in a female character and stir it all up, and the aliens come as well, and we go from there. But it's an amazing strong female empowering film through Sigourney Weaver and how she deals with all these male characters and their toxic masculinity. And there's that one scene, isn't there, in the extended cut where the male characters are talking. What would you do if you saw her walking down the corridor? And one guy goes, "Well, I'd give her the old wink." And that's how some men do talk. Yeah. And the fact that these men then have to work with the female character to get rid of the thing that is going to kill them all. I think thematically, conceptually, it's a very strong movie. It's just a shame it came after Aliens. So most people, wanted the happy ending and the family lives and all that kind of stuff. Instead, they got like the complete opposite of that.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, and you could argue as well that the ending would have been a fitting end to the entire series as a whole, but. I guess the gaming money, I guess.
It's a big downer, isn't it, Alien 3? But I was watching Alien 3 recently, and there was a line that really stood out to me in the extended version, which I don't think was in the theatrical cuts, where when Bishop arrives, the human Bishop, and Ripley's going to kill herself by throwing herself into the refinery. And he's like the devil. He's tempting her. He's talking to her and saying, we can take it out of you. And then there's that one line where he says, you can still have children, a family. And it's like he's trying to manipulate almost like the mother side of Ripley to entice her to come back. And there's that moment where she almost thinks about it and just says no. And it's just an empowering moment of like, she's taken a decision. It's her body. She'll do what they want. She needs to destroy this thing inside her because it's going to, potentially kill everything. And she just says no. And I just think that's one of the finest moments in the entire series of films, I have to be honest, in terms of just a really powerful moment. And then the music swells, and that's great.
But I suppose we should say, aside from Coalface, you also did. I know you said you spent many years at Sony Computer Entertainment. You worked on or co-created MediEvil, which again must have lots of ghouls and ghosts and creatures in that you probably designed. And I noticed you also did Surface Tension, which was like a sci-fi ecological fantasy. Was that a comic or a graphic novel? That was
a comic series collected into a graphic novel.
Oh, was it? Okay. Yes, Title Comics. Okay, so you've done a lot of stuff. Is there
too much stuff? It confuses people. When I'm not creating my own, creator-owned stuff, and I go to companies to, I'm looking for work and things like that. They get really confused, like what are you? What job do you want? Because you've done so many different things. Like, where do we put you? I think I just get really bored quickly. I like to move around and try different things out, and some things work and some things don't work. But it seems like a lot of stuff I've done does seem to be circling around sort of fantasy and horror stuff. But Surface Tension game was kind of like that's kind of like a monster story. It was an ecological monster story. I look at Coalface and Surface Tension as two sides of the same coin in a way. In that Surface Tension I wanted to create a really bright, sunny, day-lit kind of fantasy horror story where everything's sunny and there's flowers and it's all green and nice, but there's like this festering thing at the heart of it. And it was all drawn in very kind of pastely, colourful tones, which kind of like it's about a waterborne virus that wipes out most of the population. So I wanted to have a kind of watery feel to the artwork. And with Coalface being about the earth and coal, I wanted it to be rough and charcoal and textured and dirty and feel smudgy. And there's moments in Coalface when Tony dreams of the future, when he aspires to be in the future of tomorrow, to escape to a world of video games and computers and creativity. He sees the world in colour. So it's all nice, clean colour. And then when he slips back into going back to his divided village, coal mining village, then it all descends back into charcoals and greys and sepia tones and heavy shades and darkness. So you have this nice kind of like balance between the visual art styles. But they're essentially two different sides of the same coin.
Okay, yeah, because I was looking at some of the artwork for that Surface Tension, and there was some definite creepy vibes going on there of some of the creatures. I
have a funny story with Surface Tension. When it first came out, it got signed got option to be a TV show in the States, and I had a few meetings with. It was going to be for the Sci-Fi Channel, and I had a few meetings with the producers there about turning it into a TV show. And the first thing they said to me said, Jason, all those monsters are going to have to go. I guess monsters are just too expensive for a TV show.
Yeah, it's money first, product later, pretty much.
They spent all their money on Tremors the series, to be fair. That's where all the monsters went.
Yeah. I think they were basically looking for another Walking Dead. It was during that time when everything was going to be the next Walking Dead. They just wanted the virus bit, but they didn't want the big tentacle monsters coming out of the sea.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I suppose, you can see why, because it probably would be a lot of money.
Yes.
They would have to do it, focus on. But I mean, there's nothing wrong with focusing on the human story and just showing glimpses. I don't.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I think a lot of the Lovecraft adaptations go wrong. They've talked a lot, haven't they, about making Mountains of Madness into a movie.
For decades, isn't it? I feel like that's been talked about.
And I remember reading the scripts, one of the early drafts to the film. I don't know which draft it was. I'm sure it was rewritten many times. But they've kind of turned it into like an action movie. And I remember thinking, it's kind of not how I imagined at the Mountains of Madness. I imagine you glimpse the creatures. They're silhouetted. They play more in your imagination. They're not like barreling at you with people with shotguns blasting at them and things exploding.
Yeah, I would say I wouldn't imagine Lovecraft's work as being action orientated. That's all I wouldn't imagine.
No, people do try though, don't they? They do try to spice it up.
Oh man, I'm surprised we haven't mentioned the big fat BAFTA that's sitting on the shelf right there yet.
Oh, I forgot. That's it's wonky and it's kind of crooked, which is kind of apt because it was the BAFTA for MediEvil. So it fell off the shelf once and bent. So it's popped up by Mechagodzilla at the moment.
Oh, that's amazing. Actually, I should probably bring up MediEvil as well, because that was probably the first thing that I was introduced to that features your work. And I'm going to be a bit cheeky about this, but I heard you were the voice of Sir Dan as well.
Yes, it was. Yeah, I was the voice director alongside the audio producer for MediEvil, and we auditioned lots and lots of different actors to try to play Sir Dan, and it was so embarrassing hearing kind of relatively well-known TV actors trying to do okay, now imagine you're a skeleton and your lower jawbone has fallen off and you're reading these lines of dialogue, and I just felt so embarrassed for them. So I just thought, I'll just do it. I'll just do it
myself. It's fine.
Yeah, that's not putting else through this misery. Yeah, I know. I did that. And it kind of keeps coming back to it keeps coming back to haunt me. So that's the Fortescue.
It will never go away.
So I sold something recently in the house, and a chap turned up to buy the thing I was selling, and he turned up with some MediEvil merchandising and said, "Oh, I'm a big fan of MediEvil. Can you sign these things for me?" It's like, "Oh no!" It's like they're everywhere. But I love MediEvil. I'm glad that a lot of people like it. So it's nice.
Yeah. I don't suppose we could get a cheeky wee Sir Dan voice impression.
Oh. Okay, I'll try. No, I need to muffle my mouth a little bit. So it's like, okay.
Jason, you've made my night.
That's like a McDonald's drive-through, typically. I'll have a Big Mac and medium fry.
That was very good.
Yeah, you got it right. Cool. Thank goodness they have the teleprompters now that you can just see what you.
But it pops up on the screen now, so we know it's great.
Yeah, I think that was done for a reason. Well, I think we've reached that time in the episode, unfortunately, where we're going to have to come to, if nothing else. Jason, would you like to take it away? We're obviously going to plug your book, but what else should we look at?
I'm going to show you, because you're all Kaiju fans. I'm going to plug things that are very hard to find now, but you might be able to find them on eBay. And that is these DVD box sets from Japan.
Which are huge.
Basically, this is a range of basically it's a Toho production, and it's basically a release. They come out once a month in newsagents in Japan, and it's basically every single Toho Kaiju film released in these nice chunky box sets. So this is like it's kind of halfway between A4 and A3 sized. And in each one of these things, it comes with a DVD of the film. So you get the film in there, DVD, and in here, basically for every film, you get all of the merchandising in terms of printed materials that was released that year the film came out. So you get things
brilliant. Why don't
we get that? Because that looks amazing.
So, for example, with the first Godzilla DVD set, you get the original theatrical program, a replica of it. So that's what would have come out in the theater with Godzilla.
Brilliant.
And a few yen buying, and you take that home with you. And inside this one, you have the first ever manga adaptation of Godzilla. And you can see by this point, they haven't quite got Godzilla right. And he's literally just a dinosaur without big spines on his back. A very overweight dinosaur stomping through Tokyo. So, but they are very, very beautiful. There's some really nice kind of black and white artwork in there.
So is this an ongoing series, or have they all
finished a couple of years ago? So the entire range has been done and dusted, but you can probably buy them as back issues, and you get all the original theatrical. Sorry,
what are they called? So, like, if we look them up on like eBay or something,
DVD box. So type in Godzilla Toho DVD box, and that's what the range is called. And you get for example, you get all the banners and all the advertising banners and flyers that would have come out at the same time as the film. So you get things like these nice, and they're all different sizes, by the way. So you get all these like nice banners that you can frame in picture frames. You get things like all the banners for things like King Kong versus Godzilla. Basically, you get everything that was produced the year that film came out inside the box. You get.
That's pretty impressive things. I don't know how much they cost.
That was the manga that came out the same year as Godzilla for the film, and this is the actual replica of the actual program that would have been available in the theaters. You get all those reproduced, and you get all the original posters. For example, here's the program for Godzilla versus Mothra, which is very nice.
So, how many have you got here?
Godzilla one.
Yeah, and the posters are beautiful as well. They're really nice quality, thick stock that they're printed onto.
Oh, spared no expense.
So yeah, and you also get all the other silly Toho films like King Kong Escapes and all that kind of stuff. And this is the program that would have come with King Kong Escapes. But yeah, hunt them down. The only problem is, when you buy these in Japan, they cost around I think this was 1,850 yen. So this was about sort of 12-13 pounds. Now the problem is, people on eBay sell them for around anything from 40 to 50 pounds. So there's an incredible markup.
Sounds about right.
Scalping. Yeah.
But if you can find one cheap enough on eBay, I would highly recommend just taking a punt and buying it, because all of them have so much nice stuff in there. You can frame and rare items. They're all replica, obviously, reprints. But yeah, they're beautiful, beautiful sets.
Did you go for the whole set, or have you just been picking up ones you could find?
We were in Japan quite a lot.
Oh, of course, you could just pick it up at the time.
So you could just pick them up and I just put them in my luggage and come back with them. I got lots of stories. I used to go drinking with Kaiju film directors over there, and but we never chatted about movies. We just chatted about travel and totally irrelevant things to do with the actual films, which is a shame.
Oh man.
There we go. Well, now we have to follow up with stuff like that. Thank you for setting the bar astronomically high.
Oh dear.
Connor, go on, if nothing else.
If nothing else, the pre-orders for the Shin Ultraman 4K in Japan is now up on Amazon. So if you want to buy that, that will be roughly £40, I'd imagine, with exchange rates from Japan. You'll be glad to know, anyone who's collected the Japanese Shin Godzilla 4K set, there's a matching spine with it, so you can line them up and it looks all nice and all that. So yeah, go. Don't expect subtitles. Don't expect subtitles, but we're all here just for the monster action. So. But also go pick up the Joe DeVito Kong books, which I also recently pre-ordered recently, which is I would say the officially authorized sequels to the original 1930s King Kong. And of course buy Coalface when it comes out. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're going to say so it's Coalface, The Devil in the Smoke, available 31st of January, fingers crossed, on Amazon.
I'll be posting up the date on social media, so just follow me on Twitter. It's at Gunwriter Twitter.
So at Gunwrite.
Gunwriter,
right? And is that gun with two ends?
It is, yes.
It is, yeah. Okay, we'll make sure we do that. So obviously we're plugging Coalface. I'll also say check out Surface Tension, because that looks really interesting. You know, you can read it before or after Coalface, but it sounds, as you say, it's an interesting opposite of Coldface, especially the color palette. And thanks to Joe, I'm going to say check out Shin Ultraman in the UK cinemas, because we want more of that to come our way. So the more we can support it, the better.
Here we go. All right, so I'm going to call out something. As the American, originally from America, I feel like for everybody else who's listening to this podcast abroad, like not in the UK, if you want to understand kind of where Jason's book is coming from, what we mean by Thatcher era Britain, a really great crash course or entry level introduction to it, you could actually just pop on Netflix and watch season 4 of The Crown. So Gillian Anderson, who many people will probably know from X-Files as Sully, she plays Thatcher. She does a brilliant job. And you get a lot of who she was as a character and how she wasn't necessarily trying to do any bad, but she made a lot of lives much harder. And you can kind of see what the political climate was then. And then with regards to the coal strikes, you can see how close this country, the United Kingdom, came to having no power, no heating, and how some, areas did have that problem. It does a fantastic job of highlighting a lot of issues from that time period. So if you have the time, if you have the interest, if you want to see the political climate, rather than potentially read a book or do some internet surfing, it's well acted, it's well done. And each episode's, I think, 45 minutes to an hour, and there's only a few. So give that a watch if you want to have a primer for Coalface, if you're not necessarily of a British or UK living persuasion, because it really is a very interesting time in this country's history. And there are few documentaries or shows that really portray it in such a way that it's kind of artistically and accurately and interestingly done. I think that's probably one of the things you'll get out of The Crown. It's Thatcher is portrayed in an interesting way, not necessarily in kind of a dry way. So yeah, I'll recommend that decisively unkaiju-rific show. But the other thing I mentioned earlier in this podcast, if you are lucky enough to have the American dub and the dub of the Japanese version of Godzilla 1984, it would probably be a really interesting exercise and an appreciation in sound editing if you watch them back to back. And you get an appreciation for a good dubbing job and a somewhat lackluster dubbing job, and how sound editing can really do a lot for a film. Yeah, I'll end it on that. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We are really looking forward to Coalface again, end of January 2023. Look for it on Amazon. And as always, keep it kaiju.